are 5 great directions in the world. The East, where everything begins. The North, where is the North? The North, where you can always find trouble. The South, otherwise known as the Deep South, where sometimes you can find a friend. And the West, where everything ends. And as they say, everything ends. And the 5th direction, the place where stories come from. The place where they say, once upon a time, although they could say, once below a time, or once next to a time, or once when people had time, or once when not so many people were doing hard time. Once upon that time, there was a village. And in the village, people were living simply. And in that village, it happened that they were coming on hard times. And there wasn't as much food to find in the forests. And it also happened that in that village, there were 2 children, a brother and a sister, who were orphans. And because they were orphans and had no parents, they were left on their own. And even those that were distant relatives of theirs seemed to avoid them. And so the 2 of them lived in a certain isolation and sadness. But the truth is that it was the brother that felt most deeply isolated, for he was deaf in both ears. And because he couldn't hear, people thought that he was stupid. And because they thought that he was stupid, they avoided him entirely. Whereas his sister, who was the only one who cared for him, was cheerful and had all of her parts and was rather attractive. And so she fared a little better, although the 2 of them were mostly alone in the world. And it happened one day that a neighboring tribe, needing some help, adopted the sister and took her to their place because of her charm and because of her beauty. And she left, and that left the little brother with his deaf ears all alone. And so he was living on the edge of the village, like a dog, gathering scraps from whatever people ate, picking up skins and making his clothing out of that, and living in a daily exile. And it happened that there was even less and less game each day, so the people began to fear that they could not live properly there. And so the chiefs sat together and decided that it would be wise to move on and go to another place that they deemed to be more easy for their living and more capable of supplying food and game. And so people began to take apart the village, and they took down all the lodges. And as they were preparing to leave, someone said to that little boy, "You stay behind and live here, for we are going to a better place, and we don't want you to come and weaken our chances of finding satisfaction." And so the entire village began to leave and left behind that deaf boy. And he, for his part, lived on whatever scraps were left and began to sleep in a den as an animal does. And after a time, he realized that he would forever live by himself, and perhaps no one would ever come to that place that had become desolate where once there was a village. And realizing that that might happen, it occurred to him that he would have to follow the village, even if the village didn't want him, even if they had exiled and abandoned him and left him behind. And so, with that thought, he began to run. And he ran as fast as he could, and he ran as hard as he could in order to catch up to the village that had left him behind. And because so many of them had gone, the trail was marked clearly, and he was running along the trail, alternatively sweating with the heat of his exercise and crying with the tears of his abandonment. And somehow in the course of this running, something happened. A crack occurred in his left ear. And as he felt that crack, he began to hear from that ear for the first time. And as he was running, he could hear the birds singing in the trees. And as he was running in that way, he could hear for the first time the subtle noise that is made by the wind as it blows through the leaves of the trees. And he kept running even more fervently. And as he was running further, something cracked in his right ear. And when it cracked, he began to hear from his right ear. And for the first time in his life, he heard the sound of water gurgling and bubbling and singing in a stream that was running along the path he was running along. And pretty soon he was hearing all the sounds that surrounded people. And for the first time he felt part of things. And for the first time he felt the tickling of joy rising inside the skinny bones of his body. And he ran even faster. And now he was running with a certain steadiness, for he could hear everything on both sides. And pretty soon he caught up to the village where the people had settled anew. And as he approached that village, there was an old chief who was quietly curing some buffalo meat in the new village, for they had found game in that area, and most of the people were out hunting except for the old women and some of the old chiefs. And that old chief was sitting and looking, and he saw the boy running, and he looked at his skinny body, and he thought, that was wrong what we did to leave that boy behind. He may be stupid, but he's human, and he's part of us, and that was the wrong thing, and I participated in it. And he held up a piece of the buffalo meat, and he motioned to the boy, come here. And as the boy came carefully over to the fire of the old chief, he spoke, saying, listen, it was wrong of us to leave you. And as he watched that boy, he noticed a certain sparkle in his eye, and he thought, this boy is not stupid. This boy is not crazy. I can see the glimmer of a light at the back of his eyes. And he spoke again and said, I will make a place for you here at my fire, and I will teach you to be a hunter, and maybe one day you will be a chief. And the boy, hearing words really for the first time, not fully understanding the literal meaning of what was being said, could gather from the tone and the gesture and the feeling being emoted by that old chief that he was being welcomed and given a place. And so he stood there and accepted the meat and ate it hungrily. And from that day on, he began to live there at the fire of that chief in the new village. So the orphan boy, after suffering the pangs of exile, and through the exertion of his own spirit, had cracked the spell that kept him from hearing the song of the world, and had found his way to the new village, where it happened that that old chief named Good Running was watching for something and saw that boy coming and recognized an alertness in him he hadn't seen before. And just to repeat, because it bears repeating in times like this, that old chief said, we were wrong. We made a big mistake, and I was part of it. And in saying that, he saw even more clearly the spirit behind the eyes of that orphan boy. And he welcomed him there to his own campfire and gave him a place. And then it happened that his wife came along. And she said, what's going on now? You're bringing the idiots home? What will people think if we have this outcast sitting at our fire? Are you going crazy, old man? And are you becoming stupid? But the old man said, I have seen something in this young man, something that I wish to nurture and nourish and feed. And so his wife relented, and the orphan boy became part of that family, and he had a place at that campfire. And after a time, the old chief, Good Running, said to him, you know, I have recalled your birth, and I remember that before people began referring to you as stupid and an outcast, you had a name. and your name was Long Arrow. And now I think that you should have the chance to grow into the size of that name. And so, I'm going to teach you how to hunt and how to carry yourself like a man. Not an average man, not a general man, but as the man that was born inside you on the day that you were born, that caused people to say, a long arrow has come here to our village. And so the education of the orphan boy, otherwise called Long Arrow, began. And because of this cracking open that had happened to him, he learned very quickly. He learned the language of speech, and he learned the language of hunting, and he learned the language of being a member of the village. He learned the various protocols that it takes to become fully human. And the orphan boy became an effective, if not meaningful, member of the tribe. And even the wife of Good Running began to feel proud of this boy at their fire. But inside the orphan boy, he could still feel the outcast that he had been, and he could notice in the eyes of the people when they looked at him that they remembered that he was an outcast. And so one day he said to the old chief, listen, I am very grateful to sit at your fire and that you have made me a part of the tribe. But I wish to do something exceptional, and I wish to give something to this tribe so that people will forget that I was an outcast and see me as you see me. So what can I do? And the old chief said, you're becoming a great hunter, and if you keep going in this way, you too will become a chief one day. And the young man said, one day is too far away from this day. I'm asking, what can I do on this day, in this time, right now? What can I do that will move the hearts and the spirits of the whole tribe? What can I do? And the old chief said, well, there is something, there is one thing, but I hesitate to tell it to you because I have become very fond of you. And I hesitate to reveal to you what it is that the old people think about on the long winter nights, for I fear that if I tell you, I might lose you. And Long Arrow said, if you don't tell me, you may lose me as well. And so the old chief said, all right then, on the long nights of winter, when darkness permeates everything, the old people think and dream and talk of the spirit animals. For we have heard of these spirit animals that live with the spirit people in the depths of a mystery lake that exists somewhere. And we have heard that there, in the mystery of those waters, they keep spirit animals that are as large as an elk and as strong and swift as an elk, but that are also loyal and faithful and helpful like our dogs. And so we call them Elk Dogs. And in the long nights of winter, the old people dream of these Elk Dogs coming here to the village and visiting us and giving us the blessing of their great spirits. That's what everyone thinks about. But I can tell you this, in the past, when times were better, when the administration had a little bit more humanity, back in those days, young men would set off in order to find these spirit animals, and everyone would support their going. But I also have to report that none of them ever returned. So we have never seen these spirit animals, and we have never seen our sons that went in the direction of that mystery lake again. And that's why I hesitate to give you this information. And Long Arrow said, well, the cat is out of the bag now, and I am the next candidate. For I wish to go, and in terms of timing, I wish to go right away. And the old chief said, wait a minute. I have a responsibility here since I gave you this notion. You can't leave in the condition you are in. You are not ready for those spirit waters. If you go the way you are now, the spirits may avoid you, and you may die in the wrong way. So now you must learn how to prepare for a journey that involves the spirit and the heart and the soul. Now you must go amongst the people in the tribe that have medicine. Now you must be purified in the old ways that people were purified in order to open the spiritual way to their eyes. Now you must go and learn what is in your own heart. And you must learn how to open your heart and be compassionate to the suffering of other people. Otherwise the spirits will avoid you. Now you must learn the medicine ways from everyone in the tribe that has medicine. And more than that, you must learn of the medicine in your own heart. And if you do those things, then you will be ready to go. And so the second education, the deeper education of Long Arrow began. And he began to spend his time with the medicine people, learning this way of healing and learning that, mostly learning of his own healing, and in the process learning of his own nature, and in the process of that beginning to gather the wonder of the inner world to add it to the wonder of the outer world. And this training went on for whatever amount of time it went on, until the day where Long Arrow went to the old chief and said, "I think I am ready." And the old chief then said, "Then tomorrow is the day to go, for once you are ready, why wait?" And so the next day, when the sun rose and chased the darkness from the world, the old chief and Long Arrow also rose up, and they went to the edge of the village, and they told no one of his departure, the two of them standing there at the edge where the village ends and the great world beyond begins. And standing there at that edge between those two places, the old chief did some further purifications and cleansing of the young Long Arrow. And when those were finished, he said to the young man, "Now it is time to go, and we are facing south, for this adventure exists in the south. And as long as you are going, you must keep going south. And when you leave here, walk 4 days in no direction but south, and then begin to watch and listen and pay attention to what happens. And now I give you all the blessings that I carry in my years, so that you may be protected and find the way to the Mystery Lake." And at that point, Long Arrow began to walk without looking back, keeping his eyes and his head and his mind and his heart facing to the south. And he began to walk the 4 days that had been suggested. At the end of 4 days, he came upon a pond, and he walked directly towards that pond. And as he approached the pond, at the edge where the water met the earth, he saw standing a strange looking man. And he went up to him and said, "Listen, I'm out here in the world. I'm looking for the Mystery Lake, for I wish to find the spirit people, and from them I wish to get one of the spirit animals we call elk dogs, and I'm wondering if you know anything about it." And the man standing at the edge of the water said, "I don't know anything about it, but I would tell you this. If you continue south 4 times 4 days, you may come upon my uncle. You may find him by a lake that exists in that direction. And he is older than me and has seen more of the world. And if you can find him and ask the question, he may give you an answer. Then again, he may not. That's the way it is out here in the world." And then he turned and walked directly into the water and disappeared below the surface of the water. And so Long Arrow began to walk southward again, putting one foot in front of the other, 4 times 4 days, walking through valleys, over mountains, walking right through the soles of his moccasins, and steadily walking, eating little, drinking little, until after 4 times 4 days, he came upon a larger lake. And as he approached that lake, he saw, standing at the edge where the earth meets the fluidity of the water, a very tall person, the tallest person he had ever seen, clearly some kind of spirit. And this one with a sharp, angular face, as if it was a brother to a hatchet, and that tall face standing on the top of that elongated body, looking straight down at him, and said to him in a fierce voice, "Little man, what are you doing here?" And Long Arrow said, "I'm out here looking for the Mystery Lake. I'm looking for the spirit people. I'm hoping to get one of those spirit animals we call the elk dogs. Do you know anything about it?" And the man bent down and put his weird face close to the face of Long Arrow and said, "Little man, are you not afraid of me? And Long Arrow, who was full of fear inside and thinking of all the possibilities that such a strong, strange person could visit upon him, said, "No, not really." And he smiled gently. And then that tall spirit made a grimace that disturbed him even more, although he understood that this was passing for a grin. And then the tall spirit said to him, "Since you are not afraid, and I find that quite enjoyable when you little humans don't collapse in fear before something you don't really know about, since you can tolerate the presence of the unknown staring into your own face, I will tell you this. I don't know where that lake is, but I do know if you continue south from here 4 times 4 days, you will come perhaps upon that lake, and if you get there, you might meet someone who can give you an answer and give you direction, but then again, you may not, for that's how it is out here in the world where all different things meet." And then he turned and walked into the water and disappeared below the surface of the water. And Long Arrow turned and continued walking south 4 times 4 days. Are you willing to keep going on this journey south? And with the spirit singing inside him like that, a yes for life and a yes for the adventure and a yes even for his own fears, Long Arrow kept walking. He was tired now. Food had been long gone. He left the water behind and was not able to drink or quench his thirst, but he kept his face and his mind and his heart going south. And after a time, 4 times 4 days, he entered a place and could see the surface of a lake that was twinkling and glittering and dancing with light, reflecting the sun above. And it was a huge lake, and all around the lake there were mountains and forests that seemed to surround it and seemed to be bowing towards it. And he walked straight to the edge of that lake. And arriving there, he looked in all directions, thinking maybe he would see a tall spirit or something like that, but he saw nothing and received no welcome. And standing there at the edge of those waters, he realized he was deeply, deeply tired. And so Long Arrow lay down at the edge where the solid earth meets the fluidity of the waters, and he fell asleep. And he fell into a deep sleep. And he slept a short time or a long time or whatever time it was until he sensed that there was something near him. And then he suddenly awakened. And as he awakened, he looked around and saw before him a boy dressed in clothes of many colors, sparkling with a radiance seemingly equal to the water reflecting the sun. And the boy said to him immediately, "Welcome here. We have been waiting for you. And now that you have arrived, are you ready to go to my grandfather's lodge and visit the spirit people?" An orphan boy, sometimes called Long Arrow, said, "I am ready to go and ready to go now." And at that point, that radiant boy in the clothes of many colors suddenly turned into a kingfisher bird and danced in the air before him, and then suddenly dove towards the surface of the waters, penetrated the waters, and disappeared down into the waters. And Orphan Boy stood there, hearing his own words echo in his mind, for he has just said, "Yes, I am ready to follow you," realizing the only place to follow was into the water as those spirits had gone. And at that point, taking a deep breath and remembering all the things he had learned from all the medicine people of the tribe, the Orphan Boy began to walk towards the waters, dreading that he would suffocate and drown in the weight of the waters. But as he entered the waters, they seemed to part before him, and he walked straight in, and pretty soon he was under the waters. And once he was under there, he was surprised to find out that he could breathe even under the waters. And as he was walking down the slope of the bottom of the lake, deeper and deeper into the waters, he could see before him the kingfisher flying. And he kept walking in that direction, his eyes on that bird and his feet on the bottom of the lake. After all the long walking and the going without, the encounters with the various spirits, Long Arrow had arrived drained and exhausted at the edge of the Mystery Lake, and falling into a deep sleep, was awakened by the sense of a presence nearby, and waking up saw a boy in radiant many-colored clothes, who said to him, "Welcome. We have been waiting for you. Are you ready to go to the lodge of my old grandfather?" And without thinking, Long Arrow said, "Yes, I am." At which point, that radiant boy turned into a kingfisher, flew up into the air, and then turned and dove towards the water and disappeared below the surface of the water, leaving Long Arrow with the realization he had committed himself to do the same thing. As he entered the water seemed to part, and despite his fears of drowning and suffocating, he found that he was able to breathe under the waters, and his feet could find the soft earth at the bottom of the lake. And he began to walk again, and ahead he could see the kingfisher with his colored feathers flashing in the water. And he followed, going down the slope, deeper and deeper into the lake. And eventually at the bottom, he saw the kingfisher fly across a little clearing. And he walked into the clearing, and then he could see before him a great wooden lodge. And all around the lodge, on the outside, were painted pictures as if from stories, painted with vermilion paint, beautiful images of animals and scenes from stories. And he felt compelled by this beautiful imagery on the outside, and he walked towards the lodge, and looking up at the very peak on the pole at the top of the lodge, he saw the kingfisher bird there. And looking at the bird suddenly dove towards land, and striking the ground, turned back into the radiant boy, who said, "Welcome to the lodge of our old grandfather." And when the boy turned and walked into the lodge, Long Arrow followed him in. Entering into the lodge, he looked around, and all around the inside of the lodge, he could see shields with pictures painted on them. He saw clothing that was hanging, made of beautiful parts of animals' hides, beautiful colors with shells woven into them. Everywhere he turned, all he saw was beauty. And then looking at the back of the lodge, he saw an ancient old man sitting. And when he looked at the man said, "Welcome. We have been waiting for you. Come on in here. Sit down. Are you hungry?" And Long Arrow said, "Famished." And he gave him meat. And Long Arrow began to eat hungrily. And while he was eating, the old man said, "Most who come here suffer in such a great fear that they either drown or turn around and go back to the surface. And then they have to make their life out of the things of the surface of the world. But you, my son, seem to be able to remain here, be here, dwell here. And that's a good sign. And it's possible that you will receive a gift while you're here to take back to the upper world. In the meantime, eat your fill, and when you're finished, go and look around outside with your little friend." And so Long Arrow finished eating the meat, and then he went with the radiant boy, and they went outside, and they walked around the lodge, and they walked around the field that they were in. And as they were going around, they saw a herd of wonderful animals. They were huge like elks, but their bodies were sleek and shiny and glossy, and they had fine hair on their heads like a maiden or a beautiful woman. And though they were huge and seemed fierce, they looked at Long Arrow with large wells of gentle eyes. And as he looked at them, he thought, "This must be them. I must be seeing the spirit animals, the elk dogs." And just as he was thinking that, the radiant boy said, "Now, watch carefully and observe everything that happens." And then the boy went and he slid himself up onto one of these great spirit animals, one that was dark as the night. And as soon as he got on the back of that spirit animal, the two of them, as if they had become one, began to fly across the field so quickly that they seemed to become part of the wind. And the tail of the great beast stretched out behind like hair flying in a storm. And Long Arrow watched in wonder as the two-headed thing flew around the field. And then when it came to a stop, the Radiant Boy said, "Now, it's your turn." And so Long Arrow slipped up onto the back of the spirit animal and began to ride it like the wind. And he felt inside himself a joy even greater than the joy he felt on the day when Good Running invited him to the fire. And after riding for a while, he came back to the ground. And then the Radiant Boy said, "Listen carefully. The thing to do now is dwell with the old grandfather. And while you are there, watch everything carefully and do not miss a thing. But most of all, watch and see if his feet become exposed. Notice that the great black robe that he wears comes all the way to the ground, and you see not his legs nor his feet. But if you can get a glimpse of his feet, then you are entitled to ask for a gift. So dwell, observe everything, and watch especially the moment when his feet are exposed." And so Long Arrow began to dwell inside the great lodge with the old grandfather. And while he was there, he watched everything, and he listened to everything, and he watched especially the feet of the old one, watching for the opportunity to see if the feet would be exposed. And it happened one morning that the old grandfather got up early, and in going out the door to do his business outside, his black robe got caught on the edge of the door, and it caused his leg and a foot to be exposed. And Long Arrow had been up before him and was watching carefully, and what he saw was not the foot of a person, but a shiny leg and a hoof, like those great elk dogs that he had been riding out in the field. And because of the surprise of seeing the hoof on the old chief were expected to see a foot, he let out a cry, and at that moment the old chief turned and said, "Ha! You have seen my feet. Another indication that you belong here. And also, because you have seen this, you now are entitled to ask for a gift. And my advice to you is, do not be timid. When it comes to asking for gifts, do not be a timid boy, but ask with the depth of your heart. And so now I want to know, what gift would you like?" And Long Arrow said, "Could I come back and answer the question after going outside?" And the old chief said, "You can do whatever you want. The door is open. Anytime you are ready, ask for a gift." And so Long Arrow went outside and looked for the Radiant Boy and went and told him what had happened and said, "What should I ask for? You know this place and you know the old grandfather. Can you advise me what to ask for?" And at that point, the two of them, the Orphan Boy and the Radiant Spirit Boy, began walking around the lodge, talking about the business of gifts and timidity, of courage and imagination, trying to decide which gift the Orphan Boy should ask for. After walking around the perimeter of the old grandfather's lodge, and after discussing the ins and outs of gifts and gift giving and the background issues of being orphaned in the world, the Radiant Boy said to Long Arrow, "In terms of asking for gifts, you should ask for three things. Ask the old grandfather for a black medicine robe like the one he wears, and ask him for the many-colored quilted belt that he wraps around it, and ask him for the entire herd of elk dogs." Long Arrow took a deep breath, stepped back into the lodge of the old grandfather, and he said, all right, I've considered it, and what I would like is a black medicine robe like the one you wear, the many-colored quilted belt that holds it together, and the entire herd of elk dogs. And the old man said, you aren't timid, are you? And I told you I can't refuse you. So I will give you the black robe, and I will give you the many-colored and quilted belt. But I cannot give you the entire herd of elk dogs. So I will give you half of them, and I will keep half of them here. But since you have asked in the proper way, not timid, but going for the whole big thing, I wish to give you one more gift. And that is a rope made of the hair of a white buffalo. And now let me tell you about these gifts that you have asked for, what they are and what they mean. The black robe is a medicine robe, and as long as you wear it, you will be protected and you will be connected to the spirit animals. But should you not wear it, they will disappear from your life. The many-colored quilted belt is a way of communicating with the unseen world. And when you find yourself in trouble, if you can become quiet enough, songs and prayers and helpful words will come by staying near that belt. The elk dogs, of course, are the great spirit animals that can help you and your people thrive. And they are the source of many great medicines. And the last thing, the rope made of the hair of a white buffalo, is a snare that will allow you to catch any spirit animal, anyone at all. And so, whenever you need to catch the spirit of an animal, you can use that. And those are the gifts. And now, eat well and prepare yourself to leave. And so that's what Long Arrow did. He ate again of the food of the lodge of the old grandfather. And then he went to the radiant boy to say goodbye. Turned to the old grandfather once again out of great gratitude for all the gifts that were given, for all the nourishment that was given. And at that point, the old grandfather said, a caution on the way home. When you leave here, go back in the direction from whence you came. When you exit the waters of this mystery lake, do not look back. When you enter the upper world again, the elk dogs will not come with you at first. Walk 4 days without looking back. And after 4 days, you will sense them behind you, coming up on your left, and still do not look back. Walk 4 more days, and only then turn and look at them, and use the snare to catch one and ride it the rest of the way. Is it clear? And Long Arrow said, perfectly clear. And then he turned again to the radiant boy, who immediately turned into the kingfisher and began to fly before him. And now, going in the opposite direction, he followed the kingfisher up the sloping earth at the base of the mystery lake, finally up to the surface of the waters, and the bird broke through the surface, flying into the air, as kingfishers do. And behind him came Long Arrow, not looking back, but looking straight ahead. When they reached the other world, the kingfisher turned and disappeared back into the water, and Long Arrow did not look back, but he began to walk forward as he was instructed, walking 4 days by himself without looking back, but all of the time reflecting on everything that had happened, carrying his gifts with him, and thinking of his village and the people. After 4 days, he could sense behind him the elk dogs, and he could sense them coming up on his left side. His left side. And he walked 4 more days in the presence of something he couldn't see but could only feel on that left side. And only at that point did he turn, take the rope made from the hairs of a white buffalo, snare the greatest, shiniest, darkest, blackest of those elk dogs, slip up upon it as he had learned to do, and he began to ride like the wind back towards the village that he had left some time ago in the distance. In a very short time, in the fluidity of the union with that great spirit animal, they arrived at the outskirts of the village, who were doing what they were usually doing on a given day. And Long Arrow came riding up, full of the excitement of the gifts that he carried, full of the inspiration of the beast that he rode. And he rode towards the village, but the people looking out from the round of mundane days and nights didn't see Long Arrow coming. They saw a 2-headed beast coming at them, and they grew immediately fearful. And they began to send out guards to protect the village, and they shouted and yelled and gave quickly the sense that he should not come there at all. Long Arrow rode round and round the village, trying to find a way in, calling out and hoping someone would recognize him, but no one did. And so finally, he retreated to some distance from the village and began to settle down and think over the problem. And that night, he remembered what the old grandfather had said. In a time of difficulty, pay attention to the many-colored quilted belt, for it could bring songs and prayers and words of wisdom. And so he became as quiet as he could become, and he listened carefully. And what he thought he heard from the many-colored and quilted belt was the advice that the next time you go towards the village, call out to the old chief, Good Running, for he was bound to recognize his orphan son. And so Long Arrow began to do the practices he had learned from Good Running and from the medicine people, and he began to prepare himself to go back towards the village and call out to the old chief. And when the day came, he mounted again that same beautiful and swift, black and shining elk dog, and began to ride towards the village. And the people looked at him with fear again. But this time he began to call out to the old chief, saying, Good Running, don't you recognize the orphan son that you brought to your campfire? Good Running, don't you recognize the one you taught to hunt and prepared to go on the great mystery journey? Good Running, don't you recognize your son? And Good Running heard the voice and realized that it was Long Arrow coming back, and coming back, in fact, on the back of the elk dogs. And he told the people, Open and let him in. It's the son of the tribe coming back from his adventures in the spirit world. And so people became a little bit more assured, and they opened and they let him come into the village. And pretty soon everyone saw the wonders that he had brought, and particularly those elk dogs. And then Long Arrow began to teach everyone how to slip onto the back of the spirit animals. And after that, the people became prodigious hunters, and they found all of the food and all of the game that they needed. And after that, Long Arrow was revered as an important member of the tribe. And after that, Good Running was revered as an elder that could see what was hidden from others, and as one who could hear the call when it was necessary to hear it. And things went pretty well, except for the fact that people kept saying, Take us to the mystery lake. Open the waters for us so we too can get to the lodge of the old grandfather and see the mystery animals in their place of origin, and so we too can get gifts. And people began to trouble Good Running and Trouble Long Arrow, saying, "You must take us there to where you have been." And once again, Long Arrow did not know what to do, until he began to make himself quiet in order to listen, to see if the Belt of Many Colors could give some advice. So after the difficulty of re-entering the village of daily life, Long Arrow became quite celebrated and almost revered. And a similar thing happened to Good Running. For people realized the value of the old chief in seeing keenly into the young man and seeing that the fire that was hidden behind the pain of the orphan. And people knew that some kind of redemption had occurred. And so they kept pressuring Long Arrow, and by turns Good Running, to cause the young man to lead everybody to the Mystery Lake so that everyone could have firsthand the experience that they felt through his life. Long Arrow, not knowing what to do and having resisted this pressure for quite a while, became quiet and listened to the many-colored and quilted belt for advice. And though he listened for a while and kept as quiet as he could, no advice came. And he wasn't sure whether he was doing something wrong or not. But as he sat and sifted through his own feelings, he realized perhaps this was an issue that was simply up to him, that there was no guidance in this situation. And so, not knowing what else to do, he decided that he would try it. And so it was announced to the entire village that Long Arrow was to lead everyone on the journey south, hoping to reach the Mystery Lake again. And the day was set and the time was set. They would leave at 10:30 in the morning on a certain day. All the arrangements were made. And the whole village prepared themselves such as they might. And soon enough the time came and everyone left. And they went 4 days south. And the whole village prepared themselves such as they might. And soon enough the time came and everyone left. And they went 4 days south. And Long Arrow pointed out the pond where he had met the first spirit, or water spirit, or tall spirit, and told the story again of meeting that spirit and being sent further on. And they reached the lake where he had encountered the hatchet-faced spirit, and he explained the whole thing that had happened with the fear inside and how he spoke against that feeling inside and how that moved that spirit, and he got some more advice, and they kept going, and eventually they reached the Mystery Lake, and everyone was excited and crowded up to the shore, and they stood there and they watched the water and they watched the air for sights or signs of the kingfisher, and they watched the water waiting for it to part and open so they could all enter it and go down to the depths below the top of the lake and find the lodge of the old grandfather. And though they stood there for a long time, and though some made prayers and other burned sweetgrass, nothing happened. No sign came. Or maybe the whirring of an engine going by. You know, the whirring of an engine. Forget it. No sign came. No shooting stars. No kingfishers. No parting of the waters. And people began to grow sad. And people began to accuse Long Arrow of having made the whole thing up. And they forgot of the evidence of the Elk Dogs. And they forgot of the evidence of the change in the spirit and the feeling and the wealth of the tribe. And people began to have their separate feelings. And pretty soon everybody realized nothing was going to happen. There was no way to simply part the waters and give everyone such an experience. And once they were over with the disappointment, they decided to do a ritual right there at the edge where the earth meets the waters, and make prayers and send them down to the old grandfather's lodge below. And after they had done that, everyone felt better. And it was then that Good Running said, perhaps we have conceived this the wrong way. Perhaps the way we did it before instinctively was the right way. And that is, we must all go back to the village of our daily lives. And we must prepare and watch and look for the glimmer at the back of the eyes of our young people. And when we see that light burning at the back of their eyes, especially those that are outcast or not received by the tribe, we must prepare them and send them to the lake. For that's what happened before, and maybe that's the only way to get a connection to the deep waters of the Mystery Lake. And so that's what they did. They went back to the village, and they began to watch more carefully their young people, the girls and the boys that were coming along. And when they saw that light ignite at the back of their eyes, then they took each of them that brightened up in that way, and they began to teach them the practices of healing and the ways of cleansing and the ways of purifying. And they listened to their dreams, and they began to send them out into the world, looking for the spirit animals and looking for the Mystery Lake. And as far as I know, they are still doing that today. At least some of them are. For if they had stopped doing that, all contact with that mystery water would have stopped. And if that ever happens, both of the worlds will collapse and will be well worse than we are under the current administration. And so every story comes to an end, and we ourselves are coming right up upon the end of this story. And it's possible that whatever has happened here can never be fully shared with anyone else, even if we brought them here and stood in the field and said, look, here is where we dug the holes, and here is the hole where this happened and that happened. A dream was born, and something was clarified and buried in the ground. And people would stand there and they would see nothing but the earth itself and maybe some disrupted soil. And maybe that's always how it is. Only those who go through it get to fully know it, even though the benefits of it may spread to the people around them. I'm not sure. I only came here to tell this story and to say thank you for opening your ears to hear it.